Power, Deception, Propaganda. A new book by James O'Keefe. Pre-order now at AmericanMuckraker.com.
My name is David Johnson. I'm a packaging engineer for Hasbro. They are attempting to covertly push CRT, critical race theory, through branding and messaging through their products. I decided to come to Project Veritas because I opposed the indoctrination of children that they wanted to push.
Explain what we're looking at here.
This is the program developed by the Conscious Kid, which is working with Hasbro to teach children about racial bias at an early age.
Is this a mandatory all-hands training?
Yes, it was mandatory for me.
Children as young as 2 are already using race to reason about people's behaviors.
2-year-old racists is just an absurd concept.
By 3 to 6 months, babies are beginning to notice and already express preference by race. By age 3, children are already starting to apply stereotypes. They also may use racist language intentionally at this age.
I think this is where the mask starts to slip a little bit.
Is this what people are talking about regarding critical race theory?
This is critical race theory in practice. They explain that the white children in particular have the particular bias against black people. It's a mainstream ideology now, and it's in a lot of our institutions. People that I've spoken to about these issues, and I'm trying to explain to them why teaching people to segregate based on race or by gender or by any other inherent characteristic is wrong. If you want your children to be looking at people based on their race, then you are opposing Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. So I think that's progress in the truest sense, that we should not be judging each other by the color of our skin, but rather by the content of our character and actions. If the next generation of children is allowed to be indoctrinated to believing that racial segregation is a good thing, I don't think it will lead our country to anywhere good. Racism exists. I think we'd be fools to say that there is no racism in the world, but teaching children to judge others based upon race is not going to make a world with less racism, it's going to make a world with more of it. This isn't something I wanted to do, this is something I felt I had to do. This is a hill worth dying on. If I can make one person just step away from this ideology and say, you know what, maybe that's not the way, it's not the path towards a better future, then I think it's worth it. This isn't something I wanted to do, this is something I felt I had to do. This is a hill worth dying on.
So, tell me your name and what you do for a living.
My name is David Johnson. I'm a packaging engineer for Hasbro currently.
And why did you decide to come to Project Veritas?
I decided to come to Project Veritas because I opposed the indoctrination of children that they wanted to push. And I felt that more people needed to know about it.
How are they indoctrinating children?
They are attempting to covertly push CRT, critical race theory, through branding and messaging through their products.
Explain what we're looking at here.
This is the program developed by the Conscious Kid, which is working with Hasbro. I'm not sure exactly to what extent, but this is their program to teach children about, well, teach is a strong word, but they want to introduce children into racial bias at an early age before they're really able to understand what race and racism is.
Is this a mandatory all-hands training?
Yes, this meeting was attended by, well, you can see at least 44 people. I remember it being more on my screen, but it was mandatory for me.
How much do you know about this nonprofit which developed the training on this? This is the Conscious Kid. Tell us about that.
This was actually the first time I'd heard of them was this meeting. Following it, I did a bit of research. I know they work with a few other very, very large corporations, like I believe they work with Google, the NFL, Nickelodeon, who's also a big partner with Hasbro.
No, Hasbro isn't the only heavy hitter, are
No.
they? As you mentioned, they work with the NFL, Players Association, MGM, Nickelodeon, and
YouTube.
And YouTube.
That's a large share of like the market for children's entertainment. Like Hasbro itself is already a huge company because they have like everything from My Little Pony to Transformers, but YouTube is almost like the main the main hub where people go for entertainment now. If they're using YouTube to push this ideology, then that's going to have very, very far reach and very wide implications.
You sent this tape to us the same day that you recorded it, correct?
Yes.
Why was it so important to you to get this tape to us immediately?
Mostly, originally, it was actually just out of shock. I couldn't really believe what I was hearing in the meeting. It was just so overtly, this word gets overused, but it was overtly racist and very, very discriminatory. And the first thing that I thought of was just like, I have to tell people about this, just because of how big the company is. And this was before I knew the Conscious Kid had other connections, but just Hasbro by itself was just massive enough that I'm like, people need to know this is being pushed onto their children.
And have you ever done this before, like blown the whistle, recorded, and published?
Never.
But it occurred to you instantly to do it.
Yes.
Had you seen what we had done previously or known about whistleblowers?
I've known about Project Veritas for a little while, and I've seen some of your previous whistleblowers, and I've always thought it was just amazing that people would step forward and just risk everything to just get a message across. Didn't ever think I would be one of those people, but here I am.
Here you are. What moment troubled you most from this training?
It's so unnecessarily divisive, and it's assigning blame to an entire group of people based on their skin color and not by their actions or by what they choose to believe.
Let's take a look at the tape of the training.
I think we
that
should.
You recorded.
By 3 to 6 months, babies are beginning to notice and already express preference by race. There was research that looked at how by 6 months, infants living in a homogeneous or same race neighborhood showed preferences for faces from their own racial groups, whereas infants living in more racially diverse environments did not show that same preference for their own racial group. And this is really important because we see that early exposure to different races is impacting these preferences before babies are even 1 year old. Children as young as 2 are already using race to reason about people's behaviors, and we may see this play out in daycare or on the playground in how kids are starting to choose or exclude playmates and friends.
Wow. By 2 years old, quote, already using race to reason about people's behavior, and they exclude kids on playgrounds.
Yeah.
Shocking.
2-year-old racists is just an absurd concept. I don't think at 2 years old, most of them know how to read or write. Many of them may, well, I would hope they know the alphabet by 2, but I think it's absurd to just state as fact that at 2 years old, the children are going to be racist and using race to reason about who they're going to play with and discriminating based on.
Conscious Kid, which is the contractor that Hasbro works with.
Yes.
And does this. Is this mandatory training?
This one was, and from the way they described it, this is at least the 2nd training that they have done.
In the moment you watched this, what was going through your head?
My jaw hit the floor, and I've seen critical race theory and all the other terms that this goes by. I've seen this ideology a lot over like the past 7 years. Is just to have it so in my face at my place of work was just astounding to me.
3 to 6 months old?
3 to 6 months, and I believe it's state by age 3 or by age 6 is when children start to express overt racial biases against people of color.
By age 3, children are already starting to apply stereotypes, and research shows that they also may use racist language intentionally at this age. And white children at this age may report explicit or overt negative attitudes towards people of color. So already by age 3, this can happen. By age 4, kids are showing a strong and consistent pro-white, anti-black bias. And at this age, it is seen in the research really significantly against black boys, but this anti-black bias occurs across gender at this age. At the age of 5, children show many of the same racial attitudes held by adults. By this age, children are really also sensitive to the status of different racial groups in our society and show a high status bias towards white people, which is the socially privileged group in our society. White children show pro-white bias at this age, and it's really important to note also that Black and Latinx children do not show the same in-group preference for their own racial groups at this age.
This is just absolutely absurd to just state categorically that at 5 years old, your children are as racist as the adults, which is implying that the parents are also racist in some manner. I just think it's absurd. I don't know how they don't see it as discriminatory to group an entire race of people, like how they explain that the white children in particular have the particular bias against Black people. And it's like children develop things based on what they're taught. And if they're going to be teaching this to children, then yes, you're going to have more children with a racial mindset because you're teaching children to have a racial mindset. And when I was growing up as a child, I had a mixed race group of friends, and this never came up. Children don't naturally just look at each other based on their race unless they're taught it. And these people are teaching children to be racist.
Through Hasbro.
Yeah, they want to use Hasbro to push more of this ideology. And this isn't happening in just a vacuum, but it is happening at Hasbro.
Is this what people are talking about regarding critical race theory? Is this an element of that?
This is critical race theory in practice. What they're doing is they're taking the applied version of their ideology and using that to covertly push their messages on children. So instead of like reading from a book about critical race theory, you'll ask a question just like, well, why do white people hate Black people? Like that's not a direct quote from a book, but you're pushing the ideology more covertly.
Overtly. We've heard about overtly. We've heard about schools. I don't think we've heard about toys yet.
You can see it. There's parents rising up around, I'd say the country, but actually just the entire Western world, because of how far critical race theory has just spread throughout our institutions. And parents really need to pay attention to this. It uses a Marxist lens to look at people as oppressed and oppressors. And then in critical race theory specifically, it divides people who have whiteness as the oppressor and people who lack it as the oppressed. And no matter what, you are split between those two groups. So it's inherently divisive.
There's a pretty definitive conclusion they've come up with. You say this type of labeling can be weaponized against all races.
Oh, for sure.
Not just Black people.
So when they say whiteness, generally they do just want to refer to white people, but they will also extend that to anyone who speaks out against critical race theory. You'll often hear that you have implicit whiteness, or you are defending it, or they've called people race traitors. But
race traitors.
You will get some pretty bad slurs if you speak up against this. I've been called a coon. I've been called some nasty things.
By whom?
Just by random people that I've spoken to about these issues, and I'm trying to explain to them why teaching people to segregate based on race or by gender or by any other inherent characteristic is wrong. But just to go against the orthodoxy, some people just react to it so negatively.
This is just in your life.
Yeah, this is just in my life.
Just in your life in the past, because you've spoken up about this personally. So what do you think your detractors are going to say after you go public with this information?
I think I'll end up becoming a Black white supremacist. I think that'll be the label. But if not that, then just general, I might be called far right. I might be labeled some other slur. I don't care. People need to know about this.
What's your reaction to them calling you a, quote, Black white supremacist or a, quote, race traitor, as you said?
Oh, I just laugh. I think it's really funny when people who claim to be on the side of progress and tolerance go around telling people what they have to and can't believe based on their race or their gender or whatever.
What is their end goal?
I don't think Hasbro has an end goal with this, honestly. This was the only meeting where this came up. However, I think the end goal for the conscious kid is to make sure that Hasbro is going to use their lens and Hasbro is going to push their principles through all levels of their product, marketing, packaging, what have you.
We also see a lot of invisibility in products and media, and especially in children's products and media when it comes to communities of color. This also has an impact in communicating whose lives and stories are worthy of being represented and celebrated. Regarding product content and anti-Blackness, a large portion of media or products are centered around or perpetuates anti-Blackness, and research shows that negative or deficient depictions of Blackness in media and products perpetuates this anti-Blackness, as well as aversive racial attitudes toward Black people. And beyond attitudes, this can have an actual impact on interactions with Black people. And for both kids and adults, stereotypes in the product and content can reinforce dangerous hostility and resentment towards marginalized community, and also exacerbate a lack of empathy, which is known as the racial empathy gap.
So invisibility in products with Blackness.
Yeah, I guess the point they're trying to make there is that you will see less, I guess, dolls or toys specifically for people with darker skin, which might be true, but again, we're not supposed to be a society where the Black people only play with the Black toys and the white people only play with the white toys. And to me, that's not progress, it's regress. It's a regress of the civil rights era and the progress that was made there.
How can creators either reinforce or disrupt biases through product? Well, product can do one of three things, or all three things. It can send efficient or affirming messages about societal structures and narratives. Product can also communicate messages about racial power and privilege, and it can also impact the way children see and interact with the world, whether creators are being intentional or not.
I think this is where they're really their mask starts to slip a little bit, because the term racial power is very, very interesting. Because again, why are they trying to get people to see the world in terms of race if they're the same people who are complaining that one group is privileged over another? The assumption in itself that one entire race of people is privileged over another because of their skin color is racist in itself. You're assuming that because their color just makes them walk through life easier, or their color of the skin makes them have a harder life just by default. That's stereotyping, which is the thing they're supposed to be complaining about. But as you can see, they want to either reinforce or disrupt racial biases. They don't want a colorblind world. They want to teach people to see things in terms of race so that they can judge people in accordance to how they want them to be ranked.
Do you think there's anything valid about the teachings of this seminar?
I'd say the only thing that has a grain of truth is that some children might not necessarily make decisions based on race, but kids notice race because kids notice differences. I've been around children that have asked me, "Oh, why are you Black?" It's not because they're being racist, it's because they're a child and they don't know what's happening in the world. They're just trying to learn things. But these people are making the assumption that children are just racist by default if they notice a difference in race, specifically the white children.
They're not hiding their point of view. In fact, you may say many of the talking points are featured on their own website, publicly. And we talk about people who hide things versus show them. Oftentimes, journalism is about showing people things they don't want made public. Do they want people to see this?
I don't think they do. Maybe on the surface, you'll see companies say like, we're promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Whatever most people interpret those terms to mean, I think they just generally interpret them as good. But to actually show that you're telling families that their 6-year-old is as racist as they are, I don't think is something they want public.
Did you grow up around mostly white kids or?
Not. My school might have been primarily white, but the people I hung out with, my best friend was Hispanic. We hung out with a kid who was from Vietnam. We were a mixed group of kids, and we didn't ever judge each other based on race. Obviously, we noticed the differences between our families and our just cultures, but it was something to be celebrated, not something to judge and not something to condemn people over. Racism exists. I think we'd be fools to say that there is no racism in the world, but teaching children to judge others based upon race is not going to make a world with less racism, it's going to make a world with more of it. I think if people genuinely want to rid the world of racism, then they need to stop judging others based on their race and just get to know them as individuals. I think The best example of this is Daryl Davis. He's a black musician and artist, but he befriended and deconverted Ku Klux Klan members because he just got to know them and they got to know him as a person instead of just as a black person. And he's living proof that this is how you end racism.
Did anyone else at your company, you don't have to say their names, but did anyone else you know feel concerned as you did about this?
Not to my knowledge. At the end of the presentation, they have like a Q&A. Most people just give the clap and they say, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I don't think most people think too much about it.
Are you close with your parents?
Yes, very. I love both of my parents very much.
Do they know that you're doing this?
They do not, so they're going to find out a bunch of things today.
And how do you think they're going to respond to this?
It's going to be fun. I think it's going to be kind of heated, but I hope that they will see this and they understand that I am serious and I do not want my future children or my cousins or my nieces or nephews to become indoctrinated into a racist ideology. And that is why I am here.
Going to be heated?
It probably will be heated.
Do you think they'll be proud of you, worried about you? What's going to be the reaction?
Probably a mix. I've always been told I need to find my voice, and I'm not an outspoken person generally. I usually just am kind of quiet and I just observe and think things. But if this isn't finding my voice, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is the most outspoken thing someone could do. So how do you reconcile being not outspoken with doing this?
Surpass my weaknesses.
Fair enough. So some people are going to say you're giving up your livelihood to do this. You're going to face a lot of criticism from people who are attacking you.
Yep.
As you said, racially. Are you nervous about that? Are you concerned about that?
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous or concerned. I don't know what's going to be the fallout of this. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of detractors and critics. But I think this is a hill worth dying on. If the next generation of children is allowed to be indoctrinated to believing that racial segregation is a good thing, I don't think it will lead our country to anywhere good. I think we've come from that past. We know the bad things that happen when we segregate and separate people and judge them based on their race. And I don't think returning to that will bring anything good to this country. My family grew up, it was very, very important to them that I understood the history of America and the history of black people in America. And as a kid, I didn't really care about it, but I always thought Martin Luther King was just an amazing person. The I Have a Dream speech, though I don't know the entirety of it by heart, but just the dream that people could come together and disregard race and just stand together as equals, I think that's an American value. I think that's progress in the truest sense, that we should not be judging each other by the color of our skin, but rather by the content of our character and actions.
Are you right-wing?
I'm not, actually.
How would you characterize?
Not traditionally right-wing. I've always considered myself center-left. I don't want big government anymore because I see what they're doing. I grew up in a traditional Christian household, so I did grow up with those conservative values. But I wouldn't consider myself right-wing or conservative.
Are you a father?
I'm not. I do want to be one someday.
How old are you?
I'm 25.
What are you going to do next?
Well, I don't think Hasbro will like to keep me.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. But after this, I'm just going to keep speaking out. I'll keep speaking my mind. If I can make one person just step away from this ideology and say, you know what, maybe that's not the way, it's not the path towards a better future, then I think it's worth it. I think it's life after me for this.
What about packaging science?
I mean, I would like to continue it. I like my field. I think it's an important field, and it has impact on the world. It might be hard after this, because I don't know how companies like to hire whistleblowers, but we'll see.
There might be an employer who might hire you, who's supportive of your mission.
I hope so. I hope there are more people in corporations who oppose this and will not just quietly let this slip into their company and be used as a vessel to push, well, discriminatory ideologies.
Are you doing this to be famous?
No, I don't want fame at all.
And what do you think about fame being thrust upon you next week?
Carl Benjamin said this. This made me necessary. This isn't something I wanted to do. This is something I felt I had to do because I think I have some kind of duty, I guess. Maybe duty to the country, maybe duty to the people who came before, who fought for civil rights, maybe a duty to myself to stand up for principles. Not entirely sure, maybe it's all of them. But this is something I felt I had to do. It wasn't something I wanted to do in the slightest.
People are going to say you're doing this for money. What's your response to them?
If I was doing this for money, I would have just kept my mouth shut and stayed at my job.
Do you get paid well?
Yeah, it's a decent job. Engineering of any kind is generally pretty lucrative. I wouldn't say I was making huge amounts of money, but I was comfortable. Definitely comfortable enough that I could have just kept quiet and just kept getting paid, and then I'd have to live with the fact that I'm letting this be pushed through. Actually, no, I'd have to live with I'm helping a company push this through, and I don't think I could live with that.
Are you afraid?
A little bit. Just because this is so unknown. I've never done anything like this before. I feel like I'm stepping directly into the fray, you could say, because there are people who are speaking out against critical race theory, like I've said, all across the country and the West, and they're facing some pushback because this is, it's a mainstream ideology now, and it's in a lot of our institutions, and in some places, it's taboo to speak up against this. I don't know what's going to happen. I've always been the kind of person that I've thought about where I wanted my life to go and kind of try to conduct myself accordingly, but I didn't think I'd be sitting down whistleblowing for Hasbro ever.
You're an engineer, so there's a process, but there's no process here.
There's no process. This is uncharted territory.
The impact we can have as a company, if we think we can influence the social good, that's the role we think we ought to play as part of our company.
3, 4, 5 years old are inherently racist. Is that something Hasbro supports? The thought that children that young could make such a decision about race?
I don't think that's where we would, that's not what sort of a stance we would take.